The courtroom fell silent. No one could believe what they had just heard. Judge Harold Whitmore leaned back in his chair, shaking his head as he glared down at the woman standing before him. His voice dripped with disdain. "This," he scoffed, "is exactly why single mothers like you are nothing but a burden to society. Begging for handouts, expecting the world to feel sorry for you." He chuckled bitterly. "Maybe if you had made better choices, you wouldn't be standing here embarrassing yourself today." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The young woman, Rebecca Sullivan, stood frozen in place, her face burning red with humiliation. She had come here seeking justice, but instead, she was being shamed, mocked, even. Her hands trembled as she held on to the only thing she had left, her dignity. Rebecca bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears threatening to spill. She had endured so much already. Was this really happening? Was she really being insulted like this in front of everyone? Then, something unexpected happened. From the back of the courtroom, a man stood up. His voice was sharp and firm. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, stepping forward, "I think you're making a terrible mistake." All eyes turned to him. The judge squinted, as if trying to place the face. The tension in the room tightened like a rope pulled to its limit. "Who are you?" the judge demanded, his voice laced with irritation. The man took a deep breath, his gaze locked onto the judge's. "My name is irrelevant," he said, his voice steady. "But what I know is this. You're about to learn a lesson that you'll never forget." Silence. A chilling silence. The judge frowned, shifting in his seat. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. What was this man talking about? And then, just like that, the story begins. 3 weeks earlier, Rebecca Sullivan stood at the bus stop with her 7-year-old son, Jacob. The cold winter air nipped at their skin, but she pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him to keep him warm. "Mommy, will we get a house soon?" Jacob asked, looking up at her with his big, innocent eyes. Rebecca forced a smile, though her heart ached. "Of course, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing his golden brown hair out of his face. "Mommy's working really hard." Jacob nodded, trusting her words. He always trusted her. But Rebecca wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. Life had been cruel to her. Just 6 months ago, everything was perfect. A stable job, a small but cozy apartment, and most importantly, a happy son. Then, everything fell apart. Her boss had fired her without warning. Cutbacks, they said. She had spent every penny of her savings trying to keep up with rent, food, and Jacob's school expenses. And when she couldn't anymore, they were forced out. For the past month, she and Jacob had been staying at a shelter, but it wasn't safe. She worked 2 jobs, one as a waitress during the day and another cleaning offices at night, just to save enough money for a place of their own. But every day was a struggle. Rebecca glanced at her watch. The bus was late. Again, she needed to get to work, or she'd be fired. And if she got fired, she and Jacob would have nowhere to go. Then, she heard a voice. "Hey, lady." She turned to see a man storming toward her. He was tall, with a rough look, unkempt hair, a mean scowl on his face. "You owe me money," he growled. Her heart stopped. She recognized him instantly. Keith Bolton, a man she had borrowed $50 from weeks ago to buy food for Jacob. She had promised to pay him back, but she was barely surviving as it was. Rebecca took a step back, holding Jacob behind her. I don't have it right now," she said, her voice shaking. Keith sneered. "Not my problem." He grabbed her by the arm. "You either pay me today, or things are going to get ugly." Jacob clutched her leg, his little hands trembling. "Please," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need a little more time." Keith tightened his grip. "Time's up." A woman walking by saw what was happening and rushed over. "Hey, leave her alone," she shouted. Keith glared at the woman, then at Rebecca. With one last shove, he let her go. "You got till Friday," he hissed before walking away. Rebecca felt her knees go weak, but she couldn't afford to collapse. Not in front of Jacob. She knelt down and pulled him into her arms. "It's okay, baby," she murmured, even though it wasn't. It was never okay. The next day, Rebecca stood outside a law office, her breath fogging up in the cold air. She had finally saved up enough to take her case to court, to fight for her job back. She had been fired unfairly, and she had proof. But now, after what happened with Keith, she wasn't sure if this was the right move. Would it be better to just focus on finding another job? But jobs weren't easy to come by. Not when you had no college degree and a child to care for. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. Little did she know, this case would bring her face to face with Judge Harold Whitmore. And it would change everything. A week later, Rebecca sat in the courtroom, her hands clenched together as she waited for her turn. She had been told the judge assigned to her case was strict, but she had no idea just how cruel he could be. When she finally stood before him, she spoke as clearly and respectfully as she could. Your Honor, I was unfairly dismissed from my job. I have documents here that prove I was performing well, and Judge Whitmore cut her off. Miss Sullivan, let's not waste time, he said, waving his hand dismissively. A single mother with no education claiming she was fired unfairly? How original. Rebecca's stomach twisted. Your Honor, please, if you just. Enough, he snapped. Then, in front of everyone, he delivered his cruel insult. This is exactly why single mothers like you are nothing but a burden to society. Begging for handouts, expecting the world to feel sorry for you. The words sliced through her like a knife. She could hear whispers, feel the judgmental stares. She was being humiliated. That was when the man from the back of the courtroom stood up. With all due respect, Your Honor, he said, stepping forward. I think you're making a terrible mistake. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Who was this man? And what was about to happen next? The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Judge Harold Whitmore's eyes narrowed at the man who had spoken. His fingers tapped against his desk, his irritation evident. And who, exactly, do you think you are? The judge asked, his voice low and warning. The man took a few steps forward. His presence was calm but powerful, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the judge. The courtroom remained eerily silent as people watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Like I said, my name is irrelevant, the man replied evenly. But the way you're treating this woman? That is very relevant. A murmur spread through the courtroom. No one ever dared to challenge Judge Whitmore, especially not in his own courtroom. Rebecca swallowed, looking up at the stranger. Who was he? Why was he defending her? Judge Whitmore leaned forward. You don't walk into my courtroom and tell me how to do my job. If you're her attorney, then say so. If not, sit down before I hold you in contempt. The man smirked. Oh, I'm not her attorney. The judge's nostrils flared. Then what gives you the right to interrupt my court proceedings? The man glanced at Rebecca, then back at the judge. He let the silence stretch for a moment before answering. Because you have no idea who she is, he said simply. And that's about to change. A wave of suspense crashed over the room. Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. Judge Whitmore scoffed. Enough of this nonsense. Bailiff, remove. Before he could finish, the doors to the courtroom suddenly swung open with a loud bang. Everyone turned in shock as a second man, dressed in an expensive suit, strode in with purpose. He carried a briefcase and had an air of importance about him, the kind of presence that turned heads. The judge blinked in surprise. What is the meaning of this? The suited man ignored him, walking straight toward Rebecca. When he reached her, he smiled warmly. Miss Sullivan, he said, I deeply apologize for being late. I came as soon as I heard. Rebecca frowned. I'm sorry, but do I know you? The man turned to the judge, completely unfazed by the confusion. Your Honor, I am Thomas Grayson. I represent a very powerful firm in this state, and as of this moment, I am officially Miss Sullivan's attorney. The courtroom erupted into gasps. Judge Whitmore's face paled. He recognized that name. Everyone did. Thomas Grayson wasn't just any lawyer. He was one of the most feared and respected attorneys in the country. The kind who handled billion-dollar lawsuits. The kind who could ruin careers. What was he doing here, representing a struggling single mother? Judge Whitmore swallowed, trying to regain control. This is highly unorthodox, he muttered. Grayson smirked. So is humiliating a woman in your own courtroom instead of listening to the facts of her case. Another collective gasp. The judge clenched his jaw, clearly flustered. Rebecca, still in shock, turned to Grayson. Why are you helping me? She whispered. Grayson's smile softened. Because someone very important to me asked me to. Rebecca's mind spun. Who? Who had sent this man? And more importantly, why? 3 weeks earlier, Rebecca sat in the dimly lit diner where she worked, rubbing her tired eyes. The dinner rush had ended, but her shift wasn't over yet. Rebecca, you okay? She turned to see her coworker, Lisa, watching her with concern. Rebecca forced a smile. Yeah, just exhausted. Lisa sighed. I don't know how you do it. 2 jobs, a kid, and now a court case? You're a superhero. Rebecca let out a tired laugh. I don't feel like one. Lisa nudged her playfully. Well, you are. At that moment, the bell above the door jingled. A man walked in, taking a seat at the counter. Rebecca didn't pay much attention at first, just another customer. But as she approached him, something about him felt different. He was well-dressed, but not flashy. His eyes were sharp, studying the place as if he had been here before. And when he looked up at her, his gaze was filled with something she didn't recognize: interest. Coffee, please, he said. She nodded, pouring him a cup. Rough day? She asked out of habit. He chuckled. Something like that. They made small talk as she refilled his coffee. She learned his name was Daniel, but he didn't offer much else about himself. He asked her about her life, though, about her son, about why she looked so tired. Rebecca didn't know why, but she answered. She told him about her struggles, about the lawsuit, about how she was just trying to keep her son safe. Daniel listened carefully, and when she was done, he simply said, Some people have no idea how strong you are, Rebecca. She blinked. I what? He smiled. You'll see soon enough. And just like that, he left, leaving behind $100 tip. Rebecca never saw him again. Until now. Back in the courtroom, her breath caught in her throat as she turned to the first man who had spoken up for her. She studied his face, the sharp blue eyes, the calm confidence. Her stomach twisted. It was him. Daniel, the man from the diner. But who was he? And what was he about to reveal? Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the man who had defended her. Daniel, the stranger from the diner. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. What was happening? Why was he here? And how did he know Thomas Grayson, one of the most powerful attorneys in the country? The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Judge Whitmore looked between the two men, his frustration barely contained. I will not have my courtroom turned into a circus, he snapped. He turned to Thomas Grayson. If you are indeed her attorney, then present your case properly, or I will dismiss this nonsense right now. Grayson smirked. With all due respect, Your Honor, the only nonsense I see here is the way you've treated my client today. Another wave of gasps. No one spoke to Judge Whitmore like that. The judge's face reddened, but before he could respond, Daniel finally stepped forward again. I think it's time you know who Rebecca Sullivan really is, Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. Rebecca felt like the ground beneath her was shaking. What was he talking about? She was just a single mother trying to survive. Judge Whitmore scoffed. What are you trying to pull here? Daniel locked eyes with him. You judged her without knowing her story, without knowing who she is. And now? Now, you're about to learn the truth. The room went silent. Rebecca swallowed hard. The suspense was unbearable. Then, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and held it up. And what he revealed made the entire courtroom gasp in shock. 3 weeks earlier, Rebecca had hit her lowest point. It was the night before her court hearing, and she was sitting on a park bench with Jacob asleep in her lap. The shelter had run out of space, and she had no money left for a motel. The cold night air bit at her skin, but she ignored it. Tears welled in her eyes. She had tried everything. She had begged for her job back. She had asked every landlord she could find to let her rent with what little she had saved. She had even tried to get a loan, but no bank would help a woman with no credit, no assets, and no stable job. She was exhausted. Jacob stirred in his sleep, snuggling closer to her. Rebecca kissed his forehead, her tears landing on his soft skin. She had to keep going. But how? How could she fight when the world kept knocking her down? As if the universe was listening, a voice spoke from the darkness. Rough night. Rebecca jumped. She turned and saw a man standing a few feet away, dressed in a black coat. He wasn't threatening, but there was something intense about him. She wiped her eyes quickly. Yeah. Just waiting for morning. The man tilted his head. No home. Rebecca tensed. She didn't know if she should answer, but something about the man made her feel like she could. No, she admitted softly. The man sighed, stepping closer. You know, people like you aren't supposed to be forgotten. And yet, here you are. Rebecca frowned. What do you mean, people like me? The man studied her, as if seeing something no one else did. Then he said something that chilled her to her core. You have no idea who you really are, do you? Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. What? The man pulled something out of his coat pocket and placed it beside her on the bench. A white envelope. Take this, he said. And when the time is right, open it. Before Rebecca could ask another question, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. She hesitated, then reached for the envelope with shaky hands. Inside, she found a single sheet of paper. A document. A document that would change everything. Back in the courtroom, Daniel unfolded that same document. Rebecca's breath hitched. Judge Whitmore squinted. What is that? Daniel's lips curled into a small smile. The proof that you just insulted the wrong woman. The judge's eyes darkened. Enough games. Explain yourself. Daniel turned the document so the entire courtroom could see. And as soon as Rebecca saw what was written on it, her vision blurred. She staggered back. No, this couldn't be real. She covered her mouth in shock, her legs trembling beneath her. The entire courtroom exploded in gasps and whispers. Judge Whitmore's eyes widened. For the first time, he looked scared. And then, Daniel spoke the words that sent a shockwave through the entire room. Rebecca Sullivan, he said, his voice clear and steady, is not just a struggling single mother. He turned the paper toward the judge. She is the rightful heir to one of the largest fortunes in this country. Rebecca's knees gave out. Everything went black. She fainted. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, and the frantic murmuring of stunned spectators filled the air as Rebecca's body crumpled to the floor. Someone help her, a voice cried. Jacob, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery, screamed. Mommy! Thomas Grayson was the first to react, kneeling beside her. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, checking her pulse. She's fainted, he announced. Get some water. Daniel stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He expected this reaction. How could he not? He had just dropped a revelation that would shake the entire country if the media got wind of it. The judge, who had just minutes ago humiliated Rebecca, sat frozen, his mouth slightly open in shock. How? Judge Whitmore finally managed to say. Daniel didn't answer him. Instead, he crouched next to Rebecca, gently tapping her cheek. Rebecca, wake up. A few seconds later, her eyes fluttered open. Rebecca gasped, jerking upright. Her head swam as she tried to process what had just happened. Had she heard correctly? Had Daniel really said that she was an heiress? Mommy! Jacob jumped into her arms, burying his face against her shoulder. Rebecca held him tightly, still struggling to breathe. I don't understand, she stammered, looking at Daniel. What are you talking about? I don't have any family. I don't have any money. I've been struggling my entire life. Daniel gave her a small, knowing smile. That's what they wanted you to believe. Rebecca shook her head furiously. No, that's not possible. My parents, they died when I was a baby. I grew up in foster care. There was never any mention of a fortune. Daniel nodded. I know. That's exactly why I'm here. The courtroom leaned in, eager for the next revelation. Judge Whitmore, who had been trying to regain his composure, finally slammed his gavel. Enough. This is getting out of hand. If this is some kind of joke. It's not. Thomas Grayson interrupted smoothly, standing up and adjusting his suit. He held the document Daniel had presented and looked at the judge with icy confidence. And I suggest you keep quiet, Your Honor, unless you want to make things even worse for yourself. A ripple of shock swept through the room. The judge's face reddened. How dare you? Read the document. Daniel interrupted, his tone sharp. The bailiff, looking hesitant, took the paper from Thomas and handed it to the judge. Whitmore's eyes scanned the text, and as he read, his expression changed. First, annoyance. Then, confusion. And finally, fear. This can't be right, the judge muttered under his breath, gripping the paper tightly. Oh, but it is, Thomas said coolly. And it's legally binding. Rebecca, still shaking, forced herself to stand up. Tell me, she demanded, her voice breaking. Tell me what this means. Daniel turned to face her fully. It means that you, he said, are the only surviving descendant of Jonathan Kensington. The entire courtroom gasped again. Rebecca blinked rapidly. I don't know who that is. Daniel sighed, though he didn't seem surprised. That's because they erased you from history. 25 years ago, Jonathan Kensington was one of the wealthiest men in America. His real estate empire had made him a billionaire, and his influence stretched across the country. But his personal life? Tragic. His wife had died young, and his only child, his daughter, Lillian, had vanished. The media had speculated for years. Some said she ran away. Others whispered that there had been a family scandal. What no one knew was that Lillian had been pregnant when she disappeared. And that child was Rebecca. Rebecca felt her head spinning. No, no, this isn't real, she whispered, clutching Jacob tightly. I know it's hard to believe, Daniel said gently, but it's the truth. Your mother, Lillian Kensington, disappeared because she was trying to escape the people who wanted to control her life. She changed her name, married a man she loved, your father. But when they both died, the people who wanted to erase the Kensington legacy made sure that you were left with nothing. Rebecca shook her head furiously. That doesn't make sense. If I was part of a wealthy family, why wouldn't anyone come for me? They didn't want you to exist, Thomas answered. Jonathan Kensington spent years trying to find his daughter, but the people around him, his lawyers, his business partners, even some of his own family, lied to him. They told him she was gone forever, that there was no child. By the time he finally discovered the truth, he was on his deathbed. Rebecca felt like she couldn't breathe. He never got to meet you, Daniel continued, his voice softer now. But he made sure that his will reflected his final wish. Thomas took the document back from the judge and handed it to Rebecca. Jonathan Kensington left everything, his fortune, his company, everything, to his missing daughter or her child. And since your mother never came forward, that means it all belongs to you. Rebecca stared at the document. Her hands trembled as she traced the words. It was all true. She had gone from being a homeless single mother to the owner of $1 billion empire in the blink of an eye. It was too much, too fast, too impossible. Rebecca's knees buckled again, but this time, Daniel caught her before she could fall. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion, fear, and disbelief. Why? She choked out. Why are you helping me? Daniel's face softened. Because I promised someone I would. Rebecca swallowed hard. Who? Daniel hesitated for a brief moment. Then he sighed. Your grandfather. The room fell silent again. Rebecca's heart stopped. You knew him? Daniel nodded slowly. Not just knew him, he said. I worked for him. I was the only person he trusted in the end. And before he died, he gave me one mission. He looked at her, his blue eyes filled with certainty. To find you. Rebecca's breath hitched. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But as she looked around at the stunned faces in the courtroom, at Thomas Grayson standing beside her, at the fear in Judge Whitmore's eyes, she realized it was real. Her life had just changed forever. And the people who had hidden the truth from her, they were about to pay the price. Rebecca sat frozen, the weight of Daniel's words crushing her. She wasn't just a struggling single mother. She wasn't just another forgotten soul scraping by. She was Rebecca Kensington, the heiress to one of the most powerful fortunes in the country. Her body trembled as she stared at the document in her hands, her name printed boldly on the legal papers. It was real. Every word, every clause, every carefully crafted statement proved that she was the rightful heir to Jonathan Kensington's empire. And yet, she couldn't believe it. The courtroom was deathly silent, everyone waiting for her to react. Even Judge Whitmore, who had spent the last 20 minutes humiliating her, now sat stiffly, his eyes betraying something she never thought she'd see, fear. Rebecca took a shaky breath. I don't know what to say. Daniel knelt beside her, his presence grounding her. You don't have to say anything yet, he said gently. Just take a moment to process it. She turned to her son, Jacob. His big, innocent eyes looked up at her, confusion written across his tiny face. He didn't understand what was happening, but Rebecca did. This changed everything. For years, she had suffered, working 2 jobs, sleeping in shelters, struggling just to keep Jacob safe. And all this time, she had been the granddaughter of a billionaire? It didn't make sense. Her hands clenched the document, her mind racing. If this was true, then that meant someone had gone through a lot of trouble to keep it from her. But why? Before she could ask, Judge Whitmore slammed his gavel. The sound echoed through the room, breaking the tension. This is absurd, he snapped, his face red with barely contained anger. There must be a mistake. There is no way this woman, this homeless single mother, is the heir to the Kensington estate. Daniel's expression darkened. Thomas Grayson, the powerhouse attorney, folded his arms and smirked. Are you questioning a legal document, Your Honor? His voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it. The judge stiffened. I just find it highly unlikely. Unlikely or inconvenient. Thomas shot back. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Everyone could see it now. The judge was rattled. Daniel stood, his piercing gaze locked onto the older man. You humiliated her today, he said. You insulted her, mocked her, called her a burden to society. And now? Now you realize you just insulted a woman who could buy this entire courthouse if she wanted to. The judge's mouth opened, but no words came out. Rebecca clenched her jaw. A fire was burning inside her now. She had spent years being ignored, dismissed, treated like nothing. But today, she had the power. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. Slowly, she pushed herself to her feet. The room stilled as she looked the judge in the eye. You judged me, she said, her voice shaking but strong. Before you even knew me, you decided I wasn't worth your time. The judge swallowed. Miss Sullivan. It's Kensington, she corrected, her voice sharp. And you should remember that name. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Whitmore flinched. Rebecca exhaled, her heart hammering. She had never spoken to anyone like that before, let alone a judge. But she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Jacob. She was fighting for the years of suffering she had been forced to endure. She was fighting for the truth. And she would not back down. Judge Whitmore straightened, attempting to regain his authority. Be that as it may, he huffed. This court is not the place to determine the validity of these claims. If you truly are who they say you are, take it up with probate court. Until then, I refuse to acknowledge. You don't have a choice. Thomas cut in smoothly, stepping forward. Jonathan Kensington's estate has already been settled. The only thing left to do is transfer control. Rebecca's breath hitched. What do you mean? She asked, barely able to get the words out. Thomas turned to her. It means, Rebecca, that as of this moment, you own everything. The courtroom exploded. Shocked voices, frantic whispers, the sound of reporters already scrambling to leave the room to break the story. It was utter chaos. Rebecca gripped the wooden stand in front of her to steady herself. On everything. She couldn't process it. She had walked in here as a desperate single mother trying to get justice for her minimum wage job. Now, she was the sole owner of an empire worth billions. She glanced at Daniel, her mind spinning. You said my grandfather searched for me. But if he knew the truth before he died, why didn't anyone come for me sooner? Daniel's expression darkened. Because someone didn't want you to be found. Rebecca's stomach dropped. Of course, this wasn't just some accident. Someone had deliberately erased her from existence. The question was, who? And more importantly, why? She looked back at Judge Whitmore, who was still glaring at her. Something wasn't right. He was too angry, too nervous. And then it hit her. Her voice hardened. You knew, she whispered. The judge's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly masked it. Excuse me. Rebecca took a step forward, her heart pounding. You knew who I was before today, didn't you? The room fell dead silent. Judge Whitmore scoffed, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. That's absurd. I've never seen you before in my life. Then why are you so afraid? Rebecca demanded. Whitmore stiffened. Rebecca's hands clenched into fists. She had spent years surviving on her instincts, and right now, her instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. There was more to this story, something darker, and she would find out exactly what it was. But before she could say another word, the courtroom doors burst open. Two men in dark suits stormed in, their eyes locked onto Rebecca. And then, one of them pulled out a badge. Rebecca Kensington, he announced, his voice cold. You need to come with us. The room froze. Rebecca's breath hitched. What? The man stepped closer, his expression unreadable. There's been a development in your case, he said, and I think you're going to want to hear it. A chilling sense of dread coiled in Rebecca's stomach. Something wasn't right. Who were these men? And what new secret were they about to reveal? The entire courtroom fell silent. The two men in dark suits stood at the entrance, their eyes locked onto Rebecca. The air in the room changed, a heavy, suffocating tension filling the space. Rebecca's stomach twisted. Why were they here? And why did it feel like she had just stepped into something far bigger than she could possibly imagine? Thomas Grayson's posture stiffened beside her. His lawyer's instincts were already analyzing the situation. And you are? He asked smoothly, stepping in front of Rebecca slightly. The man in front lifted his badge. FBI. Agent Carter Daniels, he said. And this is my partner, Agent Reed. The FBI? Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. What? What do you want with me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Agent Daniels studied her, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk. Privately." Thomas immediately stepped in. "Not happening," he said coolly. "If you have questions for my client, you can go through her legal team." Agent Reed shook his head. "This isn't a request, Mr. Grayson." Daniel, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward, his piercing blue eyes studying the agents carefully. "If you're here for her, it means you already know who she is," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying sharpness to it. "Which means this isn't just about the inheritance, is it?" The agents exchanged a look. Rebecca's pulse pounded. Something wasn't right. Finally, Agent Daniels sighed. "We've been investigating the Kensington estate for years," he admitted. "And now that you've surfaced, things have just become a lot more complicated." Rebecca felt a cold chill creep up her spine. "What do you mean?" Daniels hesitated. "Jonathan Kensington didn't just leave you a fortune, Miss Kensington. He also left you something else." Rebecca blinked rapidly. "What?" Daniels took another step forward. "He left you a list," he said. "A list of people who wanted you dead." The courtroom erupted. Gasps filled the room. Reporters scrambled to take notes. The judge looked like he was about to faint. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. People wanted her dead? Thomas reacted instantly. "That's enough," he snapped. "If there is a security threat against my client, we will handle it privately. This is not the place for this discussion." Daniels sighed. "I would agree. But we believe the people responsible are sitting in this very room." A heavy silence fell. Rebecca felt like the floor had just been ripped out from under her. She scanned the room, her heart slamming against her ribs. Who in this courtroom had been part of this? Her eyes landed on Judge Whitmore, and that's when she saw it. A flicker of panic in his eyes. Rebecca's stomach twisted violently. "It's you," she whispered. Judge Whitmore flinched. "That's ridiculous," he scoffed, but his voice wasn't as steady as before. Agent Reed reached into his jacket, pulling out another document. "We have reason to believe, Your Honor, that you've been receiving large payments over the last 15 years from accounts connected to the Kensington estate." The courtroom erupted again. Whitmore's face drained of color. Rebecca felt like she was going to be sick. The man who had insulted her, mocked her, called her a burden, was the same man who had been profiting off of her stolen life? "Tell us the truth," Daniels demanded. Whitmore stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about." Daniels narrowed his eyes. "No? Then how do you explain this?" He handed over a folder. Whitmore snatched it, his hands visibly shaking. He opened it, and as soon as he saw what was inside, his entire body sagged. His breath hitched. For the first time, Rebecca saw true fear in his eyes. Thomas stepped forward, snatching the folder from his hands before Whitmore could react. He flipped it open, his sharp eyes scanning the contents. His face went stone cold. "Rebecca," he said, turning toward her. "You need to see this." Her hands trembled as she took the folder. Slowly, she lowered her gaze to the first page, and what she saw made her blood freeze. It was a contract with her name on it, a contract for her death. Rebecca's vision blurred. She couldn't breathe. Judge Whitmore's voice cracked. I can explain." Daniel's expression hardened. "Then start talking." Whitmore's shoulders slumped. The power he had held seconds ago was completely gone. "I didn't have a choice," he finally muttered. They told me she had to disappear." Rebecca's knees buckled. Daniel caught her before she collapsed. "They?" Thomas pressed, his voice sharp. "Who's they?" Whitmore swallowed hard. He looked around the courtroom, as if someone was watching him. And then, he shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I can't. If I tell you, we're all dead." A chill ran down Rebecca's spine. Daniel stepped closer. "Judge Whitmore, if you don't cooperate, you'll be the one paying the price." Whitmore squeezed his eyes shut. His entire body shook. And then, just when Rebecca thought she would finally get an answer, the lights went out. A loud bang echoed through the room. A gunshot. Screams erupted. "Get down," Daniel shouted. Rebecca barely had time to react before she was yanked to the ground. Daniel threw his body over hers, shielding her and Jacob. More gunshots rang out. The room descended into chaos. "Protect the client," Thomas yelled. Rebecca's mind was spinning. Her ears were ringing. Someone was trying to kill her, and they had just made their move. The gunshots rang in Rebecca's ears like an explosion. Screams echoed through the dark courtroom as people scrambled for cover. Her breath came in short gasps as Daniel pressed her and Jacob to the ground, his body shielding them. She could feel the rapid thump of his heart against her back. "Stay down," he whispered. His voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. Rebecca could barely think. Someone was trying to kill her. This wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. This was about survival. Another gunshot shattered the silence. Glass exploded somewhere near the front of the courtroom. "Get them out of here," Agent Daniels barked, drawing his weapon. He and Agent Reed moved swiftly, their trained eyes scanning the dark room for the shooter. Thomas Grayson grabbed Rebecca's wrist, pulling her toward a side exit. "Move. Now." Rebecca clutched Jacob against her chest, her heart pounding. But no arguments. Daniel cut in. He was already up and moving, his hand on the small of her back as they rushed toward the exit. Behind them, the courtroom descended into chaos. Judge Whitmore was shouting, but his voice was lost in the madness. The reporters were panicking, diving under benches. The bailiffs were trying to restore order, but it was too late. Whoever had come for Rebecca was already inside, and they weren't leaving without finishing what they started. The side hallway was narrow and dimly lit, their footsteps echoing loudly as they ran. Rebecca's breath came in sharp bursts. Jacob clung to her, his tiny fingers digging into her shirt. She was terrified, not just for herself, for him. She had spent years doing everything she could to protect him. But now someone wanted her dead. And if they were willing to shoot inside a courtroom full of people, then they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Daniel led the way, moving with military precision, his eyes scanning every corner. Thomas was close behind, checking over his shoulder every few seconds. "Where are we going?" Rebecca whispered, her voice shaky. "Out," Thomas said shortly. "The FBI has backup outside. We need to get you to safety." They rounded a corner and froze. A man in black was standing at the end of the hallway, waiting. Rebecca's blood turned to ice. The man lifted his hand, and Rebecca saw the glint of a gun. "Get down," Daniel shouted. Bang! The gun fired, but Daniel was faster. He lunged, tackling Rebecca and Jacob to the ground just as the bullet whizzed over them, slamming into the wall behind them. Thomas fired back, forcing the shooter to dive for cover. "Go, go, go!" Daniel grabbed Rebecca's arm, yanking her toward another doorway. Her feet stumbled beneath her, but she held on to Jacob with everything she had. The hallway was a maze of twists and turns. Daniel moved like he knew exactly where he was going, pulling her through door after door. Finally, they burst into a stairwell. "Downstairs," Thomas ordered. "Now." They raced down the steps, the distant shouts of the FBI agents echoing from behind them. The moment they reached the ground floor, Daniel pushed open a door, and they stumbled into the parking garage. It was eerily quiet. Dim overhead lights flickered. A few cars were scattered around, but there was no one in sight. Rebecca's lungs burned as she gasped for breath. Thomas was already on his phone. "Where's our ride?" he demanded. Daniel kept his eyes moving, scanning the shadows. "This doesn't feel right." Rebecca's arms tightened around Jacob. "What do you mean?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "They knew exactly where we were. Someone must have tipped them off." Rebecca's stomach dropped. That meant someone close to them was working against them. Before she could process the thought, the roar of an engine made them all spin around. A black SUV peeled around the corner, tires screeching against the concrete. For one terrifying second, Rebecca thought they were about to be run over. But then the car skidded to a stop just inches from them. The doors flew open. "Get in," Agent Daniels shouted from the driver's seat. Daniel didn't hesitate. He yanked open the door, shoving Rebecca inside before climbing in after her. Thomas jumped in next, slamming the door shut. Agent Reed, who had been in the passenger seat, spun around to face them. "Everyone okay?" "No," Rebecca whispered, her voice shaking. Because now she knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't over. Not even close. The car sped through the city, weaving in and out of traffic. Rebecca's hands were still shaking as she held Jacob against her chest. "What the hell was that?" Thomas demanded. "Someone just tried to assassinate my client in broad daylight." "We know," Agent Daniels said grimly, his hands tightening on the wheel. "We had surveillance in the courtroom, but they must have planned this carefully. They knew exactly when to strike." Rebecca swallowed hard. "So what now?" Daniels met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Now," he said. "Now we find out who wants you dead." Rebecca clenched her jaw. "No," she said softly. Everyone turned to look at her. Her hands tightened into fists. "I've been running my whole life," she said. I'm done running. Daniel studied her, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Good, he said, because if you really are the heir to the Kensington Empire. He leaned back, his blue eyes glinting dangerously. Then it's time you start acting like it. Rebecca took a deep breath, her fears slowly melting away. She had spent years being powerless. But now she had everything to fight for. And whoever was behind this, they were about to learn the hard way. Rebecca Kensington wasn't going down without a fight. The SUV raced through the city, headlights cutting through the darkness. The tension inside the vehicle was thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. Rebecca clutched Jacob against her chest, her arms tightening protectively around him. The little boy's breathing was uneven, his small hands gripping her shirt as if he could sense the danger all around them. He was scared, and that made Rebecca's blood boil. This was supposed to be over. She was supposed to have walked into that courtroom to claim justice, to reclaim her stolen life. Instead, someone had tried to kill her, and she still didn't know who. Daniel sat beside her, his face unreadable. He wasn't saying much, but his sharp blue eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings. His hand rested near his hip, where Rebecca was sure he had a weapon hidden under his jacket. Thomas Grayson, sitting in the front seat, was furious. His phone was buzzing nonstop, his voice sharp as he spoke into it. I don't care how high up this goes. I want names. I want every transaction traced. Someone has been funding this, and I want to know who. Agent Daniels kept his hands tight on the wheel, weaving in and out of traffic with practiced ease. We need to get her off the grid, he said firmly. At least until we figure out who's behind this. No, Rebecca said, her voice steady. Agent Reed turned to her, frowning. Excuse me. I'm not disappearing, Rebecca said firmly. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet their eyes. I've spent my whole life being erased, ignored, treated like I don't matter. I'm not hiding. Not now. A brief silence followed. Then, Daniel let out a small chuckle. Looks like she's made up her mind. Thomas sighed, rubbing his temple. Rebecca, I understand what you're saying, but this is bigger than you realize. Whoever did this, whoever's been keeping you in the dark all these years, they were willing to kill you in a courtroom full of witnesses. That means they're desperate. Good, Rebecca said, her voice fierce. Because that means they're scared. Agent Daniels let out a slow exhale, gripping the steering wheel. All right, he muttered. Then we do this your way. But you need to know something. If you're staying in the open, that means you need protection. Round the clock, no exceptions. Rebecca nodded. Fine. Daniels hesitated. And one more thing. What? He glanced at her in the mirror, his expression unreadable. If you're really going to take control of the Kensington Empire, he said, then you'd better start acting like you own it. Rebecca swallowed hard. Because that was the next step, wasn't it? This wasn't just about surviving. This was about taking back what was stolen from her. 48 hours later, the sleek black car pulled up in front of a massive steel gate, the high walls stretching as far as Rebecca could see. Beyond it, in the distance, stood the Kensington estate. Her estate. Rebecca stared out the tinted window, her breath catching. The mansion was enormous, like something out of a dream. Grand columns, perfectly trimmed hedges, towering windows that reflected the sunlight. She had grown up with nothing, sleeping in shelters, barely scraping by. And now she was staring at a house that looked like it belonged in a movie. Ready? Daniel asked from beside her. She turned to him. No. He smirked. Good. That means you understand what you're walking into. Rebecca took a deep breath. This was it. She was about to step into the world of the rich and powerful, a world she had been kept from her entire life. And something told her it wasn't going to welcome her with open arms. The car rolled forward, and the gates swung open. As they pulled up the long, winding driveway, she saw people waiting outside the mansion. Lawyers, estate managers, security teams, all standing in perfect formation, waiting to greet the new owner. The second the car stopped, a tall, older man stepped forward. His suit was perfectly pressed, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. He opened the door for her, his expression perfectly neutral. Miss Kensington, he said smoothly. Welcome home. Rebecca's heartbeat thundered. She stepped out of the car, feeling 100 piercing gazes on her. She could tell, just from the way some of them stiffened, that they didn't want her here. They had been comfortable, running this empire without her. And now? Now their worst nightmare had arrived. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to stand tall. Because this was her home, her legacy, and if these people thought they could push her aside, they were wrong. But before she could say a word, a woman's voice cut through the silence. Well, well. Rebecca turned, her stomach twisting as she saw a tall, elegant woman stepping down the stairs of the mansion. She looked like she had walked straight out of a magazine, draped in designer clothes, diamonds sparkling on her wrists. Her sharp green eyes studied Rebecca, a smirk playing on her lips. So, the lost Kensington has finally come home, the woman said. Rebecca didn't know her, but she could tell, just from her voice, that this woman was dangerous. And you are? Rebecca asked, keeping her voice steady. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Victoria Kensington, she said. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Victoria Kensington, the widow of her grandfather. And if she was still here, that meant she had spent years living in Rebecca's stolen legacy. Victoria's smirk deepened. I do hope you enjoy your stay, darling, she said sweetly. Though, I wouldn't get too comfortable. Rebecca's fingers clenched into fists. Because she knew, without a doubt, that this woman wasn't just here to welcome her. She was here to destroy her. And Rebecca wouldn't let that happen. Not now. Not ever. Rebecca stood her ground, staring at Victoria Kensington as the older woman smiled at her like a cat studying a mouse. She knew that smile. It was the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile at all. It was a warning, a challenge. And Rebecca wasn't about to back down. I appreciate the welcome, she said, keeping her voice even. But let's be clear, I'm not here to be comfortable. I'm here to take back what's mine. A few of the estate managers shifted uncomfortably. The lawyers exchanged looks. Victoria's smirk never wavered. Oh, darling, she purred, taking a step closer. You might have the name, but that doesn't mean you belong here. Rebecca met her gaze head-on. Doesn't it? The tension thickened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Victoria let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. This is going to be fun, she murmured. Daniel stepped closer to Rebecca, his presence solid beside her. His voice was casual, but there was a hard edge to it. She's not going anywhere, Victoria. Victoria's eyes flickered to him, her smirk faltering just slightly. The loyal protector. How predictable. Rebecca could feel the eyes of everyone around them. The lawyers, the estate staff, the security team. They were all watching, waiting to see how this would play out. And that's when she understood. This wasn't just about words. This was a power move. Victoria was testing her, right now. If Rebecca flinched, if she hesitated, it would tell everyone standing here that she wasn't ready for this. That she was weak. That she could be pushed aside. Rebecca squared her shoulders. I don't care what you think, she said, her voice firm. I don't care what any of you think. I'm here because my grandfather wanted me to be here. And whether you like it or not, this is my home now. Victoria's smile finally faded. The air between them crackled. And then, the older woman turned away as if Rebecca no longer interested her. She waved a lazy hand toward the massive front doors of the estate. Well then, she said, I suppose we should get you settled in. Wouldn't want you getting lost, after all. With that, she turned and walked inside, her heels clicking against the marble floors. Rebecca exhaled slowly. She had won this round. But she knew the game was far from over. The inside of the Kensington estate was even grander than Rebecca had imagined. Towering ceilings, chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds, polished marble floors so perfect she could see her reflection in them. And yet, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a museum. Like a place where people whispered in corridors and hid knives behind their backs. She kept Jacob close, her fingers tightening around his little hand. Mommy, is this our house now? He asked, looking up at her with wide eyes. Rebecca hesitated. Then, she nodded. Yes, baby, she whispered. It's ours now. Even if people like Victoria Kensington wanted to pretend otherwise. A well-dressed man in his 60s approached them, his expression unreadable. Miss Kensington, he said politely. I am Henry Masters, the estate's head butler. If you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to ask. Rebecca took a deep breath. Thank you, Henry. He nodded. Your living quarters have been prepared. I'll have someone escort you upstairs. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Living quarters? Henry didn't blink. Yes, Mississippi. The East Wing has been prepared for you and your son. Rebecca frowned. The East Wing. Before Henry could answer, Victoria's voice cut in smoothly. Oh yes, she said, stepping into view. We thought you might be more comfortable in a private section of the house. Rebecca's stomach twisted. It was a subtle move, but she saw it for what it was. They were trying to separate her, push her into some far-off corner of the mansion while they continued running things without her. She forced a smile. "That's sweet of you," she said, tilting her head. "But I'll be staying in the master suite." The room went silent. Victoria's jaw tensed. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Rebecca said, stepping closer. "This is my house now, and I'm not going to be treated like a guest." Victoria's fingers curled slightly, but her face remained calm. "Of course," she said after a moment, her voice icy smooth. "You're right. You should be exactly where you belong." Rebecca nodded, holding her gaze. She had just made her second move, and she had a feeling Victoria wasn't going to forget it. Later that night, Rebecca sat in the massive master bedroom, staring out the window as Jacob slept soundly beside her. The moonlight spilled across the vast estate, illuminating the gardens, the fountains, the winding paths leading into the trees. It was beautiful, and it was hers. But something felt off. Daniel was sitting across the room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He had refused to leave her unprotected, even inside the estate. "She's going to fight you," he said quietly. Rebecca turned to him. "I know." He studied her, his blue eyes sharp. "You handled yourself well today. But this was just the opening move. Victoria Kensington has power, and she's been running this estate for years." Rebecca exhaled slowly. "Then I'll take it from her." Daniel smirked slightly. "That's the spirit." She shook her head. "No, I mean it. I'm done letting people walk over me. If Victoria thinks she can push me out, she's wrong." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Good," he said. "Because if you don't take control fast, someone else will." Rebecca's stomach tightened. She had spent her life struggling. Now, she was fighting for something bigger. And she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Jacob's future. She looked back out the window, her determination hardening. Tomorrow, she would start taking back everything. Her fortune, her power, her place in this world. But as she turned off the light and lay beside Jacob, one thought nagged at her. If someone had tried to kill her to keep this estate out of her hands, then what would they do now that she was inside it? Rebecca's eyes remained open in the darkness. Because somehow, she knew, this fight was far from over. It was only just beginning. Rebecca couldn't sleep. Even with the soft rhythm of Jacob's breathing beside her, even with the massive security presence in the mansion, she felt it, the weight of danger pressing down on her. Someone had tried to kill her. Someone had tried to erase her existence before she could claim what was hers. And now? Now she was sleeping in the very house they wanted her dead to keep. A shiver ran down her spine as she stared at the ceiling. She had spent years fighting for scraps, begging for jobs, struggling to keep a roof over her son's head. And all this time, she had been the rightful heir to an empire. And there were people who hated that fact. People who had benefited from her absence. People who were probably plotting against her right now. A soft knock at the door snapped her out of her thoughts. Her pulse jumped. She slowly sat up, glancing at Jacob. He was still asleep, curled up in the giant bed. Carefully, she got up and made her way to the door. She didn't open it immediately. "Who is it?" she whispered, her fingers tightening around the handle. "It's me." Daniel's voice came from the other side. She let out a breath and unlocked the door. Daniel stepped in, his expression unreadable. Even though he was dressed casually, there was something about his posture, the way his eyes moved, scanning the room, that told her he was on high alert. "Something wrong?" she asked quietly. His gaze flickered toward Jacob before locking onto her. "We need to talk." Rebecca's stomach twisted. She motioned toward the sitting area near the massive window, far enough from Jacob so they wouldn't wake him. Daniel sat first, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. Rebecca took a seat across from him, her chest tightening at the look on his face. "This isn't over, is it?" she asked before he could even speak. Daniel exhaled. "No." She nodded slowly. She had known it. Felt it. "Thomas has been looking into the estate's finances," Daniel continued. "And we found something interesting." Rebecca's heartbeat quickened. "Go on." "There are missing funds," Daniel said. "Millions. Maybe hundreds of millions. The numbers don't add up." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "Victoria?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. "We can't prove it yet, but everything points to her. We think she's been funneling money out of the estate for years. If you had never come back, no one would have questioned it." Rebecca's hands tightened into fists. Of course. Of course Victoria wasn't just here out of kindness. She had been living off Rebecca's inheritance. And now? Now that Rebecca was here, she was a threat. She won't let me take control without a fight, Rebecca muttered. Daniel studied her. No, she won't. Rebecca leaned back in the chair, her mind racing. She had already made her first move by taking the master suite. Now, she had to make her next one. I want to see the estate's accounts, she said. Every single transaction from the past 10 years. Daniel smirked slightly. I figured you'd say that. Thomas is already pulling the records. Rebecca let out a slow breath. If she was going to win this fight, she needed to be smarter, stronger, more ruthless. Because Victoria wasn't just some rich widow. She was calculating. And if she had stolen hundreds of millions, there was no way she was going to give up control easily. Rebecca was stepping into a war. And if she wanted to survive it, she needed to fight back. The next morning, Rebecca walked into the grand dining hall, fully aware that all eyes were on her. Victoria was already seated at the head of the long table, sipping her coffee like she owned the world. Around her sat estate managers, lawyers, Kensington business executives, all people who had been running things in Rebecca's absence. For years, they had been comfortable. For years, they had profited off of her stolen fortune. And now their worst nightmare had walked through the door. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She strode to the head of the table. And then, in front of everyone, she pulled out Victoria's chair and sat down in her place. The entire room fell silent. Victoria's fingers stilled on her coffee cup. Slowly, she looked up at Rebecca. Oh, she said, her voice dripping with amusement. Didn't realize we were switching seats. Rebecca met her gaze, unflinching. This is my seat, she said simply. A sharp tension filled the air. Victoria's lips curled slightly, but Rebecca could see it now. The anger behind her eyes. The barely controlled fury. The other people at the table shifted uncomfortably, but none of them spoke. They were waiting to see who had the real power. Victoria took a slow sip of her coffee before setting it down. Well, she said, tilting her head. I suppose you'll want to discuss finances then? Rebecca's smile didn't waver. That's exactly what I want to discuss. She turned to Thomas, who had taken a seat beside her. Do you have the records? She asked. Thomas smirked. I do. He slid a thick folder onto the table. Rebecca flipped it open. And then, she looked straight at Victoria. Care to explain why over $300 million has been quietly moved out of Kensington accounts over the past decade? A sharp inhale echoed from someone at the table. Victoria's smile finally faltered. Rebecca leaned forward. Because unless you have a really good answer, she said, her voice steady and cold, I'm going to assume you've been stealing from me. The entire table froze. Victoria's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. And in that moment, Rebecca knew she had her cornered. But she also knew something else. Victoria Kensington wasn't the kind of woman who lost gracefully, which meant she was about to strike back. And when she did, Rebecca needed to be ready. The room held its breath. Rebecca sat at the head of the table, staring Victoria Kensington dead in the eye, the weight of the accusations hanging heavy in the air. $300 million, Rebecca repeated, her voice calm but sharp. Moved in pieces, siphoned off over the years. Disguised as investments, consulting fees, and operational costs. All conveniently funneled into accounts linked back to you. A low murmur spread across the table. Some of the estate managers exchanged nervous glances. Others looked away, suddenly fascinated by the intricate designs on their coffee cups. But Victoria? She didn't flinch. Instead, she picked up her coffee cup and took a slow, delicate sip. Then, she set it down with unsettling ease. My dear, she said smoothly, tilting her head. You've only been here for, 2 days? And already you're making accusations. Rebecca leaned forward, her fingers tapping the file. They're not accusations, she said. They're facts. Victoria let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Oh, sweetheart, you have so much to learn. Her eyes turned sharp as she looked around the table. Perhaps, she said, we should explain something to our new owner. The tension in the room thickened. And then, one by one, the people at the table lifted their heads. Estate managers, business executives, people who had been running things in Rebecca's absence. And as they did, Rebecca realized something terrifying. None of them looked surprised. None of them looked guilty. If anything, they looked amused. A slow, sinking feeling crept up Rebecca's spine. Victoria smiled, sensing the shift. "Oh, darling," she said sweetly. "Did you really think I was the only one?" Rebecca's blood ran cold. And then she understood. The theft, the corruption, the money that had been disappearing from the estate for years. It hadn't just been Victoria. It had been all of them. They had been in on it together. A silent, well-oiled machine, feeding off the Kensington Empire for years, knowing that the rightful heir was never coming back. Until now. Until her. Rebecca's fingers tightened around the folder. "You're all thieves," she said, her voice low and steady. Victoria let out a soft chuckle. "We prefer the term business people." The others smirked, some adjusting their expensive suits, others folding their hands neatly on the table. "You might have the title," Victoria continued, her voice like silk. "But let's be honest, you don't know how to run an empire." Rebecca's jaw clenched. Victoria's smile didn't waver. "You've been a waitress, a cleaner, a struggling single mother. And now you think you can walk in here, sit in that chair, and play CEO?" She laughed. "Do you have any idea what it takes to run a billion-dollar business?" Rebecca stayed silent, forcing herself to breathe. "Let me give you some advice, sweetheart," Victoria continued, leaning forward. "You might have the name, but you don't have the power. You don't have the influence. And you sure as hell don't have the loyalty of the people at this table." Rebecca's pulse pounded in her ears. She glanced around the room, and for the first time, she saw it clearly. These people didn't respect her. They didn't fear her. To them, she was an outsider, a nobody who had stumbled into something too big for her to handle. Victoria sat back, crossing her legs elegantly. "So," she said smoothly, "here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign the estate over to me." Rebecca laughed. A sharp, cold sound. The entire table froze. Victoria's smirk flickered. Rebecca tilted her head. "You think I'm just going to give this to you?" Victoria's smile returned. "It would be the smart thing to do." Rebecca held her gaze for a long moment. Then, she stood up. Slowly, deliberately. "Let me explain something to you," Rebecca said, stepping around the table. Every eye in the room followed her. "I've spent my entire life fighting," she continued, her voice low and dangerous. "Fighting to survive. Fighting to keep my son safe. Fighting against people who told me I was nothing." She stopped behind one of the estate managers. He stiffened under her gaze. She leaned down slightly, her fingers trailing along the back of his chair. "And you think I'm going to hand over the only thing I've ever been given?" No one spoke. Rebecca straightened, turning back to Victoria. "That's not happening," she said. Victoria sighed, shaking her head. "I was hoping you'd be smart about this." Rebecca smiled. But this time, it wasn't warm. "I am being smart," she said. "That's why, starting today, I'm replacing every single one of you." The table erupted. Shouts. Protests. Panic. "You can't do that," one of the executives snapped. "You don't have the authority. The estate board won't allow it." Rebecca let them scream. Then, she held up a hand. And they all went silent. She turned to Thomas. "Do I have the authority?" Thomas smirked. "Legally." He pulled a document from his briefcase. "Yes, you do." He slid it across the table. Rebecca picked it up. And then, without hesitation, she signed her name at the bottom. Every person in the room stared in horror as she set the pen down. "You," one of the estate managers stammered. "You just fired us?" Rebecca smiled. "Yes," she said. "I did." Victoria's fingers curled into fists. But Rebecca wasn't done. She turned to Daniel. "I want security teams on every account, property, and asset connected to this estate. No one takes a penny without my permission." Daniel grinned. "Already on it." Rebecca looked back at the table. "You have until the end of the day to pack your things. If you try to fight this, I'll make sure the only job you ever get is scrubbing floors at one of my hotels." The room was dead silent. Then, Victoria stood up. Her expression was no longer amused. It was pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've just done," she whispered. Rebecca tilted her head. "Oh, I think I do." Victoria leaned in, her voice low and dangerous. "You just made yourself a very dangerous enemy." Rebecca's smile didn't waver. "Good," she said, "because I'm done being afraid." The war for the Kensington Empire had just begun, and Rebecca was ready to win. The war had begun. Rebecca stood at the head of the table, her hands steady, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. She had just fired every single person who had been feeding off her stolen empire. Victoria Kensington stood across from her, eyes burning with pure hatred, lips pressed into a thin, seething line. You have no idea what you've just done, Victoria whispered, her voice low and venomous. Rebecca didn't blink. Oh, I think I do, she said calmly. Victoria's expression darkened, her fingers tightening around the chair she had once ruled from. You think you've won? She sneered. You think signing a piece of paper changes everything? Rebecca tilted her head. It doesn't just change everything, she said, her voice steady. It ends everything. You're done here, Victoria. Pack your things. A collective gasp rippled through the remaining estate staff in the room. Victoria's nails dug into the wood of the table, her jaw clenching so tightly that Rebecca swore she could hear her teeth grind. I built this estate, Victoria hissed. I kept it alive while your pathetic existence was buried in the gutters where it belonged. Rebecca took a step closer, her face now inches away from Victoria's. You built nothing, she whispered back. You stole it. And now, I'm taking it back. Victoria exhaled sharply, her nostrils flaring. But Rebecca could see it now, the cracks in her confidence. For the first time in decades, Victoria was losing control. And she knew it. You're making a mistake, she said through gritted teeth. Rebecca smiled. No, she said simply. The mistake was thinking you could keep me out forever. Victoria let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. You have no clue what's coming, do you? Rebecca folded her arms. Enlighten me. Victoria's eyes gleamed. Power, she whispered. Real power doesn't come from a name or a signature. It comes from the people who pull the strings, the people you don't even see coming. And guess what, sweetheart? She leaned in, her voice a mere breath. They're already watching you. A chill crawled up Rebecca's spine. But she didn't let it show. Instead, she smirked. Then let them watch, she said. Because I'm just getting started. Victoria's lips curled. And then, she turned on her heel and walked out of the room. No final words. No threats. Just the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor as she disappeared from view. It was done. Rebecca exhaled slowly, her fingers loosening from the fists they had formed. The estate, her empire, was finally hers. But she knew this wasn't the end. Victoria Kensington wasn't the type to go quietly. And whoever she had been hinting at, the real people behind the curtain, they were still out there. But Rebecca? She wasn't afraid anymore. Because she had fought her way out of the darkest places life had thrown her into. And she had won. 1 month later, Rebecca stood on the balcony of the Kensington estate, looking out over the vast grounds that were now hers. It still felt surreal. But she was learning. In the past month, she had taken control of everything. The businesses, the finances, the properties. The corrupt executives were gone. The stolen money was being traced and recovered. And Victoria? She had vanished from public view. For now, Rebecca knew she wasn't truly gone. She was waiting, plotting. But Rebecca had plans of her own. She glanced behind her, where Thomas stood with his usual unreadable expression. Any word? She asked. Thomas nodded. She's been seen in Switzerland, meeting with some very powerful people. Rebecca smirked. Of course she has. Thomas hesitated, then said, She's dangerous, Rebecca. This isn't over. Rebecca turned back to the horizon, the wind brushing through her hair. She knew that. But she also knew something else. She wasn't the same woman she had been weeks ago. The woman who had walked into a courtroom to beg for her dignity back. She was gone. In her place stood Rebecca Kensington, the rightful heir to an empire and a force to be reckoned with. She turned to Thomas and smiled. Let her come, she said. I'm ready. And as she watched the sun set over her estate, she knew one thing for certain. She had been forgotten once. It would never happen again.